I had been driving for hours, eyes glued to the dark, endless road ahead. It was just me, the hum of the engine, and the occasional flicker of headlights from passing cars. I was on a long haul, crossing state lines with a trailer full of goods. The plan was simple: get to the next truck stop, grab some sleep, and then continue on. But plans change. It was around 2 a.m. when I saw her. A woman, standing by the side of the road, waving her arms frantically. She looked panicked, her car parked a few yards away with its hazard lights flashing. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. I couldn't just leave her there. She ran up to my truck, her face pale and full of fear. "Please, can you help me? My car broke down, and I'm stranded out here," she pleaded. Her voice was shaky, her eyes darting around as if she was being watched. I hesitated, but then unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She climbed in quickly, and I started driving again, my mind racing. Something about this situation didn't feel right. As we drove, I tried to make small talk to ease the tension. "Where are you headed?" She didn't answer directly, instead asking, "How far are you going?" "Just to the next truck stop," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. "You can call for help from there." She nodded but didn't say anything more. The silence between us grew heavy. After a few minutes, she started fidgeting in her seat, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. Then she spoke again, her tone different this time, more demanding. "Do you always drive alone?" I glanced at her, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, why?" "No reason," she muttered, looking out the window. "Just curious." A few minutes later, she asked another strange question. "Do you carry much cash with you on these trips?" My heart skipped a beat. "Not really, just enough for food and fuel," I lied. I didn't like where this was going. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing with scenarios. I needed to get her out of my truck. The next truck stop wasn't too far, but I wasn't sure I'd make it there without something happening. Just as I was planning my next move, she reached into her bag and pulled out a knife. My stomach dropped. "Pull over," she demanded, her voice cold and steady. "Give me your wallet, or I'll cut you." My mind was spinning. I had to think fast. I couldn't let her take control. I glanced at the road ahead, spotting a narrow gravel path leading off into the woods. Without warning, I swerved the truck hard, sending her off balance. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. I didn't waste a second. I lunged across the seat, grabbing her by the arm and shoving her towards the door. She fought back, scratching and kicking, but I was stronger. With a final push, I managed to open the door and shove her out of the truck. She hit the ground hard, rolling into the gravel as the truck skidded to a stop. My heart was pounding in my ears as I slammed the door shut and floored the gas, speeding away from the scene. My arm was bleeding where she'd slashed me, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I drove straight to the next town and found a police station. They took my statement, and I showed them the cut on my arm. One of the officers shook his head, telling me I was lucky to be alive. Apparently, she had done this before, targeting truckers, robbing them, and worse. I still drive at night, but I never stop for strangers anymore. It was past midnight when I pulled into a rest stop, exhausted from the long haul. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of trucks parked under the dim lights. I needed to stretch my legs, clear my head, and maybe grab a quick bite. As I stepped out of my rig, I noticed another trucker standing by his truck, smoking a cigarette. He looked up and nodded at me. "Long night, huh?" he said, his voice friendly enough. I nodded back, not really in the mood for small talk, but it felt rude to ignore him. "Yeah, something like that." He walked over, cigarette between his fingers, and started chatting. At first, it was just the usual stuff. Where you headed? How long you been driving? But then his questions got personal. He asked about my family, where I'd lived, if I traveled this route often. It felt intrusive, and I started to get that uneasy feeling in my gut. I decided it was time to leave. "Well, I better get going," I said, trying to sound casual. But as I turned to head back to my truck, he moved to block my path. His face changed, the friendly smile gone, replaced by something darker. He pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light just enough to make my blood run cold. "Not so fast," he said, his voice low and threatening. Panic surged through me, but I knew I had to stay calm. I took a step back, my mind racing for a way out. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't say anything, just kept that knife between us, a silent threat. I knew if I didn't act fast, things would only get worse. I took a deep breath and made a dash for my truck, my heart pounding in my chest. He was right behind me, footsteps heavy on the pavement. I reached the door and yanked it open, scrambling inside just as he grabbed the handle. I slammed it shut, locking it as he pounded on the window, the knife scraping against the glass. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, but I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I hit the gas, tires screeching as I sped out of the rest stop, the man's figure shrinking in the mirror. But it wasn't over yet. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights coming up fast. It was him, tailing me down the highway. My mind raced with panic as I pushed the truck harder, praying the engine wouldn't give out. For miles, he stayed on my tail, my nerves fraying with every passing minute. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the headlights disappeared. I kept driving, heart pounding, too afraid to stop, too afraid to look back. When I finally reached a truck stop crowded with other drivers, I pulled in and called the police. Later, I found out from the news that the man I'd encountered was wanted in connection with several trucker murders across multiple states. They called him the Rest Stop Killer, a name that now haunts my every drive. I was one of the lucky ones, but the thought of how close I came still keeps me up at night. I was hauling a valuable load across the country, something that made me a bit more nervous than usual. The company had warned me about hijackers on this route, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Halfway through the trip, I noticed a car in my mirror, staying just far enough back to not seem suspicious, but close enough to keep me on edge. At first, I thought it was just my nerves. Maybe they were going the same way, I told myself. But as the miles passed, the car stayed with me, never passing, never falling behind. I tried switching lanes, speeding up, slowing down, but the car mirrored my every move. When I finally pulled into a rest stop, I hoped they'd keep going, but they didn't. The car pulled in right behind me. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the truck, trying to act calm, even though my instincts were screaming at me to leave. A man got out of the car, middle-aged, average-looking. The kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about passing on the street. He walked over, a friendly smile on his face. "Hey there," he said. "I'm with a shipping company. We need to check the cargo." I didn't believe him for a second. The company had given me no such instructions, and everything about this guy set off alarms in my head. "I wasn't told about any inspections," I replied, keeping my distance. "You got any ID?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard look. He didn't answer, just took a step closer. "Just open the truck," he said, his voice flat and threatening. I shook my head, backing away. That's when he lunged at me, trying to force his way into the truck. I managed to shove him off and jump inside, slamming the door and locking it just as he started pounding on the window. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I hit the gas, peeling out of the rest stop, my heart racing as I merged back onto the highway. But it wasn't over. In the rearview mirror, I saw the car again, speeding up behind me. They'd boxed me in, forcing me off the road. I fought to keep control, but there were too many of them. They dragged me out, beating me until I was too weak to resist. They took the truck, leaving me bloodied and broken on the side of the road. The cargo was never found. The police said it was likely part of a string of heists, but no one was ever caught. I'm haunted by that night, by how close I came to losing more than just a shipment. I can't help but wonder, every time I hit the road, if they'll come back for more.